The responsibility of HR is to create inclusive and effective workplaces, really making sure that we're bringing a human-focused lens to business problems.
HR is at odds with the CFO's office. HR is at odds with the COO's office. HR is at odds with everyone's office.
It also comes down to a lot of politics and power dynamics inside of organizations. And because HR touches on every aspect of the business, it can be seen, I think, as an intrusion to those aspects of the business. HR being at odds, I think, is the old school mentality around what human resources is. It's like, oh my gosh, it's the buzzkill. You're here to tell people that they're not allowed to dance on top of the meeting tables or something like that. By the way, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, you're not allowed to run in a workplace.
You can't run.
Can't run, no.
I've violated that.
If I catch you running, I'll tackle you.
Listen to the people. Listen to the people. People and culture. Oh yeah. It's time for the Gathering Podcast. It's time for the Gathering Podcast.
All right, Eric Hutchinson.
Yes.
Hutchinson? Hutchinson.
Like,
do people
like
pronounce that hard?
Like a hut and then chin and then sun, like I am.
Hutchinson.
Hutchinson.
Yeah.
He's in the podcast studio with us. Huh?
Nice, nice.
Yes.
Right? Better than AI. Eric, welcome to the Startwell Podcast Studio for the Gathering Podcast. We're now at episode 4 of season 2.
Of season 2.
And I'll add up the math on what that means, including season 1 later. It's like 20 something, but we're here and I'm excited to have a conversation. Martin, it's a pleasure as always.
As always. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you too.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk HR a little bit. And I'm going to let you lead this conversation, my friend.
See, that's the problem, right? Because everybody thinks I'm HR, but I'm talent. I'm a recruiter. That being said, I'm happy to lead the conversation. So Eric and I were just talking before the podcast about how long we'd known each other and whatnot. And it's been about 6 years.
6 years at this point, yeah.
And this is sort of an apology podcast because he was one of the first people that agreed to do a podcast with me.
Yeah.
4, 5 years ago.
Well, I mean, we were talking in and around 2020.
Yeah.
So it would have been like height or just the beginning of the pandemic and everyone just going distributed and trying to figure out how to navigate that. As everyone was losing their minds because no one could possibly work remote, right?
No. Not a possibility.
No.
I sense some sarcasm there.
Just a little.
So let's dig in. I guess role. How do you define what you do and where are you working? Who do you work with? You're a consultant.
Yes, I'm a consultant. So I work primarily with small, medium businesses, helping with scaling. So what I've traditionally done is worked in everything from large manufacturing and consumer packaged goods through to startup and the tech world, which is where I really got into the nitty gritty of helping businesses scale. So I've done this successfully a number of times, and I like to just bring that experience to folks who are trying to scale their own businesses, and also from a mentoring and coaching standpoint as well. For anyone who's a little bit more junior inside their HR career, I always love mentoring. For those who are in a higher level executive role and want to make sure that they're being effective in their employee relations or how it is that they're implementing HR strategies, that's an area I love to get into having conversations about.
Okay, so wait, at what point did you nail this identity piece of being someone who, helps teams scale, SMB early stage teams scale, and that being part of your interest set and your talent capabilities?
I think it just came from doing it.
Okay. You did a bunch. You're like, oh, man, this is all I do. Keep doing this over and over again.
It's a matter of really enjoying building, right?
Yeah.
So having worked with inside of larger organizations where ultimately you are trying to keep the train on the rails. The rails are very well established and you know exactly what it is from a business goal standpoint. We want to increase it by X number of points, of our, market share or whatever have you each year. Trying to build things from scratch for product lines or businesses that haven't existed before, so require a very unique approach. it's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's the core of it, and it's very interesting and it's very rewarding.
So people,
Mm-hmm.
how did people become your way into that, you know, type of work, the idea of growth and
Yeah.
building?
I mean, it's all like by and for people at the end of the day, right? And my background is in psychology and neuroscience. That's what I did my degree in prior to going on to getting my postgraduate certification, HR management, and all that jazz. So I've always had a keen interest in like human psychology and how we set people up to thrive. And that's something that you get to do inside of the HR profession in a way that no other role really gets to do.
Yeah.
So even when you're inside of an organization, if there's things that need to be improved or ways of helping make it a better place to work, I like to think I make great places to work and then work in them, or at least help to make them great places to work. It's never just one person, obviously.
Yeah, man.
Can we double click on how you identified it? Like was there a moment? Was there a period of time? Were there a series of experiences?
Maybe we can be pretty dry about it and just start from the beginning. Like, so you said you did a postdoc that then focused on HR. That was kind of like, okay, scholastically now I got some goods.
Yeah, postgraduate certification. So not a postdoctorate. I do want to emphasize that.
Okay, doctor.
Yeah, it was actually, I have to tip the hat to my uncle, Mark Shannon, who was high up in Western University at the time. And I was coming out of my degree in neuroscience and everything like that, and was like, okay, so how do I job? What do I job? I went to him naturally just asking. I'm like, you're in HR, you understand job markets and the like. And he was kind enough to point me in the direction of human resources as a really viable career path, because it is becoming a great deal more strategic. It's not just about being administrative and making sure that you're in the back office and managing the benefits and stuff like that. Increasingly, these systems are self-managing and self-serve and don't actually require that level of admin input. So the more I got into wanting to alleviate old school HR practices, coming from manufacturing HR, you can imagine very old school, very like reams and reams of paper, huge amounts of folders, really manual everything.
Literally like actual filing cabinets.
Huge filing cabinets, massive. Like entire offices of filing cabinets.
Right. Matrix printers just spewing things out everywhere.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And at that point, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so much better, and just continually wanted to alleviate this. So I think there's a classic adage that HR is almost always trying to automate itself out of a job. I kind of enjoy that. I really, really do.
So first job. So you did this certification.
Yep. First job was, I worked at a auto parts manufacturer called Linamar.
Interesting.
Really large inside of the Guelph area. Following that was just my internship, but fortunately I got to take on a full role. Following that, I went on to being the HR generalist, and again, a department of one, which historically I have always been, which creates a great deal of self-reliance. And I was running it for Metalumen Manufacturing, which again is doing the manufacturing
aluminum manufacturing.
Metalumen.
Oh,
yeah, they do the manufacturing of lighting.
Okay.
And if you're listening, Martin, or something like that, hi.
Hi.
Well, another Martin.
Martin.
Maybe you're listening to this.
You're like, I'm right here. What are you talking about?
No, Martin.
On behalf of all Martins.
Yes.
Hi.
Hello, all Martins.
But yeah, and then from there I went on to move to Toronto and met this fantastic Martin over here. And started breaking my way into the Toronto tech scene, because I knew that I really wanted to be much more involved in progressive workplaces and progressive HR solutions.
Awesome. And so software? Okay.
Yep. From there, I was working at a company called Knit People. Knit People provides payroll and accounting software, as well as an HRIS software. And so if anyone's looking for a fairly cost-effective HRIS and payroll system, they're your folks to go have a conversation with. Tell Elliot I say hi if I'm going to keep name dropping all this.
Elliot's going to be so happy.
If I'm going to keep name dropping. And then from there, I worked in different places like Green Tank. Green Tank was when I started stepping into more of the hard tech side of things, which brings my love of technology as well as my understanding of manufacturing to what I was doing. Green Tank makes vaporizers for the cannabis industry.
Oh, okay. Green Tank.
Yep, Green Tank.
Ecologically, sustainable. Vaping
No.
or something?
I think just green being for the cannabis aspect of it,
okay,
and
right.
tank being for a tank that is full of green.
Oh my God. Cannabis.
Yeah, the cannabis industry was very hot, still is.
Yeah.
But it was an interesting industry to be hopping into.
Was this at the time of legalization and
Yeah,
the
this is
whole
really-
gold rush, the green rush?
Yep, exactly.
The green rush.
Right.
Oh, okay.
And what was oftentimes
2019?
referred to as like
2019.
legalization 2.0, which is when vaporizer technology was able to go onto the shelves, which happened post flower legalization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was big,
Yeah.
and a really good experience. Still have good contacts there at Green Tank.
Was that, I mean, at this point, so a few years out of the gate, what growth at each of these stages were you seeing or responsible for?
It would oftentimes be at the stage of we now need HR properly. Like we've been doing something fractional, or we've been just trying to have someone who's the office manager run a lot of these things. But a lot of sophisticated systems had to be set up, like even having a well-functioning HRIS. So an HRIS will exist perhaps, but it's being completely underutilized. Communication systems are fractured. We're not using something like, say, for example, really getting the most that you can out of a tool like Slack. So I'm always taking things from a tech HR kind of standpoint, looking at how are people communicating, collaborating, what's the employee digital experience like?
Right.
Because ultimately, and then this is especially true as teams have become more distributed, that is the office experience. And how frustrated are people when they flip open their laptop and they can't find the files they're looking for or something like that?
Because no one knows how to do that in this day and age. No one knows what a folder is
No.
or a
it's true.
file.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
Yep.
And if you can't semantically search something, they'll never find it. Their computer will be broken and it'll need to be replaced.
Is there a way to not know? Like, I'd like to get the experience of being. Is Gen Z younger than millennial?
I don't know that math.
So, like, yeah, I kind of want to go through the experience of like, what is it to not know what a folder is? Because then I could understand a little bit better.
So let's bring that back to what you were saying and say, like, how do you plan for the digital employee experience in such a way that it is like sensitive to people's knowledge gaps?
Yeah.
And how do you bridge that gap between, procurement of tools to enable teams to kind of like collaborate and communicate, like you were saying, whilst also keeping in mind this education piece, right? Because you've got to keep teaching people how to use the tools and maybe even offer them a path to input where they can bring to the table like, hey, we used this in our previous job, or this is a really cool thing. Can we look at using this?
Yeah. I think it always comes down to reducing friction. And this is something that I got to have a good opportunity to be a part of when I was working at Knit People, and I was working with the design team on a tool that was an HR tech tool, working inside of tech and working on HR tech tools. It was a bit of like a backwards loop, but it really got me thinking of, from a design standpoint, that when people open up their interface, is it very obvious where things should be and how things are found? So it's usually not about adding more tools to the stack and increasing that complexity. It's about lowering friction with the tools that you're implementing between a person and the information they need, or the work that they need to do, or the communication that they're trying to enact. In general, when it comes to strategically approaching HR, it really is about lowering frictions for behaviors and things that we want to be encouraging folks to do, and increasing friction on the things that we are trying to dissuade people from doing. So looking at it from more of a systems standpoint than an element standpoint is, I think, important.
Yeah, but like, okay.
How does that translate into tools?
Well, nicely phrased, but yeah, like maybe there's an example of a company that you've worked with that you can kind of play out in this like tool selection and education piece.
Yeah. So I will use Green Tank as the example, only because a lot of the work that I was doing there really helped, especially when the pandemic hit and everyone had to go distributed. Green Tank had, and still has to this day, a very strong in-house culture and working together very directly.
And how many people were there at that company at the time?
At the time with Green Tank, depends on whether or not you're talking about the Chinese operations or the offshore operations, just the Toronto office itself. Sorry, I can't off the top of my head remember, but I think 40 plus.
Okay.
between 40 and 50.
Like 40, 50 people were coming into one office to hang out together every day. And then
Yeah. Then suddenly it couldn't happen. We all clapped, said, see you in 2 weeks. And of course that didn't occur, right?
yeah, it was 2 weeks in the beginning. Everyone
2,
was
3 weeks. It'll be gone. 2, 3 weeks.
Yeah, it'll be gone. We were so naive. But yeah, fortunately, with a lot of the work I've been doing around getting a robust HRIS set up, getting folks into utilizing Slack as a primary communication tool, making sure that a lot of our tools were feeding information back into the Slack platform where people are already working, encouraging people at even the point of onboarding to be like, hey, have you used these kinds of tools before? We're going to give you a walkthrough and a Q&A session on making sure that you understand the very basics that you need to be able to be successful utilizing these. And making sure that everyone could see the benefit of that as well. Because no amount of extrinsically telling people to use a tool is going to get them to use it. They have to see the intrinsic benefit in
It's true.
in and of itself, right?
It's very true.
Yeah.
The
So
why, right?
yeah,
You got to know the why.
that's the difference between meaningful and busy work. You know what I mean? Or you're just doing it because you've been told that you need to do it. So that means creating a good deal of transparency. I would even do things like, I don't know if you've looked into like Slack analytics, and you can see where people are doing their reading kind of idea and where people are sending their messages. And you can look and go, okay, look what we've done. We've now taken what was otherwise a large spread of disjointed communication. You can watch it harmonizing.
I didn't even know Slack had analytics.
It does. Yeah.
Boom. This is the thing between the desktop and mobile app versus the web interface. You know, as an admin, I don't log into the web interface because I'm using the tool.
Yeah.
It's interesting. But then again, with all the software in our stack to operate even an agile team with hardly any employees, there's just too much data. And that's another point that we can speak about.
Yes. There's so much people data in general, if we're keeping it to the HR side of things.
Yeah.
But being able to know where communication's occurring, being able to incentivize and encourage folks to be like, hey, you should be using not these direct messages, you should be using these public channels, or you should be using these private channels for these things. And just leading.
Yes. And maybe as an example of when someone used a public channel to say something they should have said in private that you can draw out from your mind.
Oh, right now?
No, I was just joking. It doesn't
I mean, there's been a few.
That's all part of the course, par for the course when it comes to HR. Is there's always at least one Slack message that has been made publicly that you have to sort of like, can you come here digitally for a second and just be like, can we just talk about what happened there and why that wasn't the thing to do?
Yeah, and just doing a bit of a call in as opposed to a call out, as they say.
Yeah.
Definitely been there, done that. But it really does come down to, as I say, lowering friction. Always, how do we lower friction for, say, for example, if you want to make sure people are doing courses for their professional development, things of that nature. Okay, you can't just tell people that there's a professional development budget. You have to be working to lower the friction towards these kinds of professional development opportunities as an organization. And I can go more into like learning and development and how to best situate that. But
I'd love to. Let's bring you to date though on your career history. So from the green tank business and the pandemic hits, and you've got 40, 50 people now online and collaborating with a remote manufacturing facility, I'm guessing.
Correct. Yeah.
You mentioned China. What happened from there?
Fortunately, not too much.
Okay.
I know that sounds very boring, but considering
is that who you work with now? Is the question, I guess.
No, I do not work with Green Tank these days. But fortunately, not too much happened because we had the right habits and tools and things in place so that folks were already comfortable working inside of a remote fashion, but doing it in-house. This was just something that I was doing to increase employee flexibility and increase clarity of communication and all of those good things. It just so happened to really have a payoff that was completely unexpected.
Which was that uptake was great and everyone was like, yeah, we can work digitally.
Productivity was good. We still had good insight on the data that was happening from, say, even the sales department, things of that nature. All of that kind of dashboarding and reporting was already coming in. So management didn't feel completely blind because they weren't seeing butts in seats.
Okay. So that was cool.
Yeah.
And then?
After that, I moved on to a company called CityLytics. CityLytics does predictive analytics for infrastructure.
Oh, neat.
So is used as a prospecting tool. It's doing a great deal of scraping of government records, everything along those lines, even something from like, say, the Environmental Protection Agency or something like that, putting out a report on a certain company that's maybe putting stuff into the wastewater that it shouldn't be. They're paying fines and they're happy to absorb those fines, but it might be better if someone who sells those filtration systems knew that a company was failing these like reports or something like that in advance, and then helps to direct them towards better environmental outcomes and social outcomes by virtue of increased marketplace visibility.
Okay. So team-wise, again, you joined that. Was that like zero to hero?
No. CityLytics had been around as Water Hub for quite some time. I believe when I came on board, had been around for about 8 years, but they're going through a very large period of growth.
Okay.
And I still actually, from a client standpoint, work with the CityLytics folks to this day. They're going through a lot of like hyper growth at this point in time. There's a lot of really good information needed inside of the infrastructure space. There's a lot of funding going into the infrastructure space, even from, and this is years ago now, but some of the moves that have been happening from the Biden administration, because US being the primary market.
Okay. Interesting.
Can we zoom out from the career history for a second?
Yeah.
You mentioned something that's interesting to me that I'm noticing in this economy, which is by virtue of being an HR person, there's this aspect of you're going to build the home, or you're going to add an extension to the home, and you're a contractor of sorts. Not a contractor by, you might be full-time, whatever. But in circumstances where you're there full time, eventually what you've built becomes sort of status quo. You've improved things to a certain...
That's the software infrastructure that the whole thing is running on and growing, and
the implementation has been done. You've made things better. Hey, we need an HR person. You made things better. But then there gets to be this point, I find, typically, like, you never... Even with software, right? The same, it gets into maintenance mode, but there's always new products to be built. So there's novel things and you can always improve. But with HR, it's the runway is less infinite, so to speak, where you still have a relationship with CityLytics, which is cool, but the relationship is very different from what it was at the beginning in the same sense.
Like you're not building anymore.
You're not building the house anymore. We built you the house. You can live in it. And if you need me to come back and fix something because the furnace broke or, a window broke, I can come back. We're seeing a lot more of that right now by nature of budgets, strictly budgets. Like, we've had HR for a while. We've got to clamp down. A lot of people are impacted, and many of them are flipping to this fractional piece. I've gone fractional myself. You're doing fractional yourself, and it's sort of this new model of working. I guess for those people who are in it right now and trying to figure it out, or for people who are just like, there's not much left for me to do here. I'm in maintenance mode. How do I evolve? Like, what's your perspective, or what sort of angles would you take from the HR side?
Yeah. And I think we've been emphasizing the technology aspect and the implementation of technology from an HR standpoint a good deal in this conversation. But all of that is to get that kind of work out of the way. Right. That isn't the main work of HR. Sure. It's a matter of, if that doesn't exist, then it's one of the first things that needs to be tackled. I think not being tech savvy and being in HR these days is, it's a limiter. But from that point in time forward, then HR has ideally a freed up amount of resources to be able to tackle things from like, an internal coaching, or really improving learning and development plans, or making sure that you're doing perhaps some increased headhunting or something of that nature, and building up those relationships, going to different conferences, conducting conversations like this. Everything under the sun that HR is able to touch now has more of an opportunity, because you're not bogged down in so much administration and technical challenges. but there's also the monitoring of the communications and the analytics and the constant feedback from folks, so that you can continue to give them that digital employee experience that everyone really demands these days.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of has to be emphasized. It's that we're so used now to having such robust technology inside of our pocket with so much thought behind it, and if someone's not engaging with an app in the first 20 seconds, they're like, that's it. They'll uninstall it, or they'll just leave it to rot on their phone, right?
Oh my God.
So we have, like, the workforce in general has such a low tolerance for inefficient, ineffective digital interfaces that why would they be looking for anything else inside of the workplace?
It's interesting. So, okay, I'd like to ask this from your perspective. Because I don't know what the tool set out there is for HR managers, HR as a business unit or whatever, to kind of have a people operating system for an organization. And whether, I assume that there's a lot of these kind of like large enterprise focused institutional, old school 1980s software companies that have kind of like stayed alive, building redundant crap for that segment because of integration points with like manufacturing systems or like big data systems or like Lotus Notes somehow
tied to it from a legacy perspective.
Exactly. But then who's like killing it that you know of to create like a people operation system? So you've got all these disparate tools, like you mentioned. You might have like I assume it's something like an Asana for task assignment, and then you've got Slack, and then you've got notifications coming to Slack from different things, and then you've got G Suite or Teams or whatever it is. So you can stitch your people together to allow them to kind of like exchange messages and files. But like, especially in a digital first environment, what are your thoughts, or what's your lens on seeing tools that enable people to kind of like open it as their home screen every single day? It's the Google search, or it's their operating system. Literally, it's like, we don't run on Macs, we run on PeopleSoft. That might be a real thing, PeopleSoft.
It is.
Yeah, is it?
Definitely. There's no way that data isn't taken. It is a thing.
Should tag them in the post. Yeah.
Well, it depends on like what information you're looking for, right? I know
The team. Let's just do the people. Like a place where I log on and I see my team, and I can like do stuff with them. The replacement for the like office reception area. I don't know.
You would get the same answer from a software developer, and I'm answering on your behalf.
Thank you.
To an extent. Sorry, but I want not to take the question away from you because I want to hear it. It's as though it's a very particular question in terms of, you ask a golfer what their favorite clubs are, and what their favorite course is, or what their, there's all these unique preferences.
Sure.
Or what are you going to use on this shot? That you're taking, right? To your point, it truly does depend, right? So if you're speaking on like, what's the best thing for Startwell, it's going to be different for every other organization for all these myriad of reasons.
It depends on the audience at the end of the day. So you'll have, like, ideally, if you have a robust HRIS, where
what is an HRIS?
HRIS.
HRIS.
Human Resources Information System.
Okay, maybe that's the starting point. What is that?
HRIS is basically where the entire employee database is contained. So that is all pertinent employee information, everything from SIN numbers to birthdays to who their emergency contacts are.
Okay.
Inside of HRISs, you can ideally be utilizing that as a data platform for what your workforce analytics are looking like. So, what is our demographic breakdown? What's happening from a pay equity standpoint? What's happening from tenure of our organization? What is our turnover rate like? Any HRIS worth its salt should be giving that information readily up to whoever it is that's wanting to know that information on the fly.
But then what about, that's great, but that's still just like replacing Judy's, filing cabinet, right? So like, what about living data, live data, and specifically not necessarily about, KPIs and performance metrics, but more about that, like the EI take on, how people interrelate, teamwork, happiness, productivity from the kind of like emotional fortitude and like, effectiveness and fulfillment of work point. That's where I kind of like don't know if there's stuff to let people feel like cool together in doing their work and keep track of that. Like HR, how does HR, this is, and again, I'm loading this because I have this question from the first 20 odd episodes that we did in season 1 of the series, where I kept hearing from guests that HR is at odds with the CFO's office. HR is at odds with the COO's office. HR is at odds with everyone's office, and they're basically responsible for just managing churn, making sure people are paid a sort of enough that they can stick around and feel like they're productive, and maybe a little bit of encouragement here along the way. But yet, like you started with, companies are people, right? And customers are people, and people are really, the HR should be so much more. So anyway, I say that and I leave it with you.
Yeah. HR being at odds, I think, is a bit of the old school mentality around what human resources is. It's like, oh my gosh, it's the buzzkill. They're here to tell people that they're not allowed to dance on top of the, meeting tables or something like that.
Terrible rule.
Yeah, terrible rule. By the way, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, you're not allowed to run in a workplace. That is against the occupational.
You can't run.
Can't run. No.
FYI,
no running.
I've violated that.
If I catch you running, I'll tackle you, and that'll solve the problem. I really don't see HR as at odds with any part of the business.
It shouldn't be like that. That's what I'm getting at, right? Is that like?
Well, it depends on the business whether or not it is at odds at all, and also the stance of the HR person and what it is that they're bringing to the table on a regular basis.
Right.
Is it fair to say that in those environments where they feel at odds with HR, it's because of the perception from the executives of it? It's, you are here to operate as a function, and we're not concerned with the more modern side of things in terms of people operations and whatnot.
Yeah. I think it also comes down to a lot of politics and power dynamics within inside of organizations. There's the idea of that power being something that's a limited pie. You know what I mean? And in this way, a lot of folks at executive levels, which tend to come with egos to match the reason that they're there in the first place, will kind of view power in the organization as a zero-sum game. And because HR touches on every aspect of the business, it can be seen, I think, as an intrusion to those aspects of the business, or an attempt to undermine what is otherwise, this is an operations thing. You know what I mean? Like this is something that's happening at the executive level. Okay. These are marketing decisions, sales decisions, all of these things.
Well, I guess this is part of the thing that I've been hearing from people in the industry is that managing people outside of their, or I should say, look, how do you distill I know HR is many things, and like you're saying, especially in SMBs where you're like the team of one, you're doing lots of stuff. But that kind of like, how would you describe, if you could, in one sentence, this team of one ownership of responsibility? What is that responsibility in a sentence?
The responsibility of HR is to create inclusive and effective workplaces.
See, so that's where I'm getting at, which is it's very big, loaded, and ideally fully integrated in all aspects of the business, right? So you need to know what drives people to enable them to do their best job, and at the same time understand what their means of communication are to best stitch them together, right? And so on and so forth. And like, okay, especially in SMBs where there's a lot of opportunity for people to collaborate because they need, the business survival relies on it. Yeah. More perhaps than enterprise, yes, IPO funded, let's float for a few decades sort of companies.
Yeah.
I think these things are very important, right? So you said that I might be hearing the old world kind of perspective on HR, or the politic around that.
Yeah.
Paint the picture of the new company, the new mindset, the companies that you see HR fulfilling a larger mandate or feeling more empowered in.
Organizations and almost every department by its nature is outside of HR very externally focused on the business, i.e. what actions is the business taking externally. And of course, that then turns back from an external standpoint back to an internal focus of like, okay, then we need to do these things so we can do this. You know what I mean? But HR, other than obviously looking at talent markets, looking at like, trends within inside of these different things, is the opposite. Always looking internally and then seeing how that like translates into external performance, as opposed to looking at external performance back end. And I think that's inside of a modern organization, the support and lens that is valued and needed. Is that HR is always looking at these things in a level of granularity that no one inside of other areas of the business has the time to do. Really making sure that we're bringing a human-focused lens to business problems, as opposed to like, again, the other way around. It's like, oh man, like the human problems, those are like over here, and those aren't as important as these business problems that we're trying to solve, but they're one and the same. And it just depends on your focus, and HR fortunately has that opportunity to be much more internally than externally focused.
If we zoom back in to your career, I'm curious how your psychology experience in school, and it's to a degree, it's obvious from the like humans and psychology, However, not everybody gets that experience, right? A lot of people just go to school, they realize they want to work with people, they go into the HR courses, and they don't necessarily get that information in advance. I'm curious how you've used it to your advantage throughout your career.
Do you have a very comfortable long couch in your office you can lie down on?
That's the antithesis of what HR needs to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like even I used to do volunteering under the stress line and things like that. There's different techniques like emotional reflection, which you can use all the time. And it's just really good for helping to build those relationships, right? Helping folks to feel heard. And these are techniques that you're learning through a psychological practice kind of idea, but are readily applicable inside of a lot of different circumstances. Different sayings that I have, like connection before correction, right? Remembering that you can't help to turn around someone's behavior or anything of that nature if that connection isn't there, right? A lot of people have a kind of like workplace trauma because you're getting correction without connection. Right? That just naturally leads to people just huddling into a corner. They're not feeling that sense of safety. So psychological safety and a focus on psychological safety inside of a workplace, immense. Because once you're able to create psychological safety or continue to reinforce the kind of behaviors that reinforce psychological safety and understand it, productivity goes up, people's attendance goes up, like multitude of factors. Innovation is absolutely dependent on how psychologically safe folks are feeling, because like odds of failure are always present. So if people don't feel safe to fail, well then good luck innovating. It's not going to happen.
Innovation is mistakes until it's not.
But then it can, like, I'm really interested in things like cognitive errors, cognitive illusions kind of idea. There's something that our brains will typically do called the substitution error, which is where if you feed your brain a very computationally heavy question, it will do a substitution with an easier to compute question and then give you that answer as though it were answering the question that you asked, i.e. does so-and-so deserve a promotion, right? If you're trying to take in all of the different factors that would go into whether or not that is something that they deserve, your brain can't handle it. So it will substitute with, do I like this person? And then feed you that answer. But because it's a cognitive illusion, which again, with optical illusions, we've all experienced these, right? You're able to go, I can't unsee it, even though I know it's not real. Cognitive illusions are all that more insidious because it's an illusion of thought. And because you're just on the receiving end of that, people aren't regularly aware of it. But being aware that this is an illusion that will occur, you can take steps to alleviate it through your performance management systems, things of that nature, making sure that when these decisions are being made, the appropriate data points are in front of folks so that they aren't just falling prey to cognitive illusions inside of key decision making.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and a lot of that is, I think, to do with this kind of idea of the open company, right? And like if people are privy to all the information and they're thinking more multilaterally, their cerebrum is activated across the whole thing, then they're living and breathing the company, not just their job. So solutions do get found that are a bit deeper, and the means of articulating with each other is also more productive, perhaps in a less KPI base, but like you can level everyone up.
Yeah. And even when it comes to like KPI, OKRs, things of that nature, I always emphasize do not tie someone's like bonus payout, whether or not you should be doing that either inside of a compensation standpoint, but don't tie these things to their KPIs. Don't do it. And why not? Because the OKR KPI system is a communication system. It's so that the dragon boat, it's the person on the drum just hitting the drum at the front, right? And it should be giving us the measurement of whether or not our focus on process improvement and our focus on like, alleviating friction for folks and finding those better market fits, whatever have you, is being effective. It is not, hey, everyone run at that number and try and achieve that. Because oftentimes that can turn into something called a perverse incentive, but we could talk more on that, but I'm diverging.
Yeah, it's like sugar and candy for kids, right? You want the candy? You want the candy? You be good, and I'll give you the bad thing that will make you into a horrible monster.
Well, because and then you can't change your KPI. What if like your organizational, especially in small, medium businesses where pivots are occurring, what if you need to change your KPIs? What if some of your OKRs are changing mid-flight kind of idea?
Right.
If you have an appropriate OKR system in place, that's fine. People just look at it and go, okay, that's where I'm bending towards now. Making sure that my work output is meeting these different goals and these metrics. Whereas if you've been tying people's performance bonuses to that, they're going to be entrenched. But I've already put so much work into achieving this number, and now you want me to look at this one kind of idea. I don't have the time to do that. Or they're going to try and just make the number look better, but through means that are maybe not as credible as what you want.
So what's the largest team that you've worked with in HR at any organization that you've been at so far?
Well, when I was working at a company called Sun Products, I was the only HR for all of Canada. Sun Products being a $2 billion business that sells sunlight detergent.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were at the time owned by a private equity firm, which I can't recall the name of, but then were sold to Henkel, and it's just slinging soap. So that would be hundreds of folks within inside of that organization. Also, then into the United States.
No, but I mean,
massive.
You said you were HR of one at that organization.
Yeah, well, in terms of the Canadian office, because it was just kind of seen almost like a satellite state, you know what I mean?
But so that was an example of big company, small HR team. Yeah. But otherwise, the largest HR team.
The largest HR team?
Yeah.
Oh, that would also have been there. In that, yes, I was HR for Canada, but I was part of the larger HR team, so that would have been a few dozen people.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Did you feel part of the larger team?
Not particularly, no. Especially being inside the Canadian office, it would be okay, now we're doing this, now Canadianize it, as though Canada were not its own country, and requiring a different, take on a lot of different programs.
It's interesting, right? I wonder, and have you been working with any companies in the last little while that are globally dispersed by nature of digital first or hybrid work strategies, hiring strategies?
Yes. The distributed companies are very quickly, I think, becoming the norm, only just because of the availability of talent. It's opened up so broadly.
Absolutely. If you can hire someone amazing to do something wherever they are and you can communicate with them, why not, right?
Well, and this is why I say that the time zone is the new commute. And that if we're all inside of the Americas and it's all one big vertical time zone, it's fairly well the same experience working with that individual as if they were, inside of the room next to you.
Going back to the operations side, it's interesting because time zone feels lazy. Because in theory, asynchronous communication using Loom, for example, or video messages, if you need a visual, or just writing out an email instead of having a meeting because you can't meet a person. As the pandemic hit, as I worked at more larger global organizations, I found new skills that I'm like, I can't believe we weren't using this, or I wasn't even using these types of things. So the time zone piece, the way you said, like the commute is the new time zone, that's sticking with me. I'm probably going to steal it, but I'll
Steal away.
reference you.
Yeah.
That's fascinating because it still feels lazy. And going back to your point, like in HR, you have to make people provide the opportunity for people to work more effectively and being more inclusive. And so one time zone's not very inclusive.
Yeah, it's not. But typically speaking, you'll see folks having to bend, right? If you're outside of the main office time zone, like, okay, well, we have to have this meeting. Are you able to be up at 4 a.m. just for this one, just for this one? And this is almost an inevitability, which
I miss that. I miss working more globally and having people in the UK that I talk to in the morning and people, on the West Coast that I talk to in the evening.
Especially when you have like HR distributed across like multiple different locations, then suddenly you've got like HR service over a massive window and just like some overlap time between like the different professionals. So
it was always nice to choose when you're going to talk to the most awoken, refreshed person. If you're in the same time zone, everyone's excited in the morning, then they're stressed that they're not getting stuff done in the middle of the day or whatever. And then they're like, in the afternoon. And then a little bit of perk before the end of the day. I could get some stuff done. I get out of the door. And then it's like, I need to get out of here. And then that was, of course, pre-pandemic. Now people answer emails at 4 a.m. But like, that's a whole nother thing.
Well, I mean, there's also the right to disconnect, things of that nature.
With a capital R, you mean like some legal stuff?
Yeah, but it's not even really a right to disconnect. It's just that the company has to be transparent.
You also can't run, though.
You can't run, yeah.
Can't run in the workplace.
Yeah, that's not allowed.
But you have the right to disconnect.
Yeah, it's more or less like organizations have to be very overt about what expectations are around communication and digital communication.
Totally, man. People can't feel like slaves.
No.
At the same time, and again, I don't want to take us down that road because it'll be a long one, but the idea of incenting people to take ownership in their position and the efficacy in their role should be almost like absolute, right? Like, I entrust you to do whatever to get this done. Are you cool with that? Yes, I'm cool with that. Okay, be cool with that. You send me an email in the middle of the night, I choose to be asleep or not, So driving people to work into the wee hours, that's a thing, but stopping it from happening is also a big question.
Well, I agree with you that like different people work better in different ways, and finding what's most effective for them. Like some folks are like, hey, between 8 to 12 is like I'm actually most productive there, or something like that. In the evening. And so all well and good, please do work in that way, but realize that if you need to have a synchronous conversation with someone, they can't be expected to be working alongside your specific way of working. So if you're comfortable doing your head down work through that time period, great, but you can't have the expectation that others are going to suddenly be able to accommodate you with sending such and such file over or something like that around that time, simply because that's how you like to work.
Right.
So all the power to folks sending the emails and the messages at 12 o'clock at the middle of night, but the others on the other side shouldn't be expected to receive those.
Let's come back to the because I'm interested. I feel like there's still more material here in this like digital operating system for companies, or at least the tools that you would build into a stack to support a company. In terms of people collaborating, if not that records aspect of things, but like people collaborating and being able to communicate. What are the things when you're putting those tools together in builder mode that you're looking for to avoid this sort of issue of immediacy and like notifications in people's face that are forced?
By empowering people to know how to turn the notifications off. That's just partial of it, building up those habits of where people are putting their statuses into Slack or whatever have you.
I never update those statuses. Forget about that.
Yeah, or ideally you're automating that. So it's like if something's inside of their calendar, it's automatically going to push and update their status. Or these are the kinds of things that you're trying to lower friction about, right?
Honestly, I would just say taking a poo. Taking a poo.
Just nothing but poop emojis.
Yeah, just poop emojis.
it should ideally taking the action inside of the workplace, i.e. completing the certain work or having a meeting booked inside of this way or so on and so forth. The communication that action has been completed, or the communication of what it is and where you are and what you're doing, should be automatic, ideally.
Have you found that adding to anxiety in the workplace, this kind of like digital overload of needing to constantly like set preferences?
Well, I think different people are going to want different things from the tools that they're using. Not everyone's going to set all of those preferences and tweak it and put it into dark mode and so on and so forth. I mean, I love doing that because it's fun for me. But you should be giving everyone at least a baseline quality of digital, like, workflow and so on and so forth, that they're then able to prove on to if they wish, but they don't have to. That's not really their responsibility. The organization should be providing that.
And how do you find people's digital realities as employees meshing with their digital their digital realities as employees? Did I say that twice?
You did, yeah.
How do you match up, right? Because we're in this digital first kind of weird reality, especially with people, working remotely. Mm-hmm. Socialization has become somewhat remote or maybe more disparate these days as well. But like, if everyone's always on their phone all the time or some device, they're messaging all their friends and family with WhatsApp and whatever else, and as well as getting information for entertainment or whatever from social networks and so on. But then they also have digital tools for work. Are you finding people being able to switch between them? I think that's part of this whole like turn your notifications off thing. And the scariness almost as an employer is to say, well, a lot of the employees might be particularly like looking for dopamine. So they're going into all the apps, the work app, the home app, whatever app, and they're just looking for some, connection. And then they're like hopped up and they can't sleep. But like, talk about that divide between day and night if you can on the digital experience, and how, as someone responsible for teams, how you can ensure or promote a better kind of hygiene around the use of digital engagement.
Yeah. To our point earlier about employee expectations about what their digital experience is going to be like, that's carrying through from their digital experience in their personal life, right? This is what the fidelity is of what I've come to expect. So in that way, there is no separation. People's expectations are going to be built off of what they're interfacing with on a regular basis. When it comes to the delineation of that from work to their personal life, I also prefer to think of things in terms of like work-life integration as opposed to like work-life balance, because it's not like you show up to work, flip a light switch and stop living. Right. That's absurd. But we like to think in some ways that you can create such a clear divide. I don't think emphasizing that divide is necessarily the best way to go about things. Digital well-being is something that everyone's being challenged with on a day-to-day basis, regardless of whether or not they're working digitally. So it's encouraging healthy digital well-being inside of the workplace in general as a way of helping folks both to interact well with these tools that we're using in-house, as well as improving their overall lives by giving those opportunities for disconnection, really making sure that you're providing, when you are doing in-house spaces, when you're using folks and places like Startwell as an example for having those really engaging in-person conversations, so that digital, I rather than telling people what not to do, showing them, again, lowering friction towards these kinds of behaviors that you want them to be doing and giving them those great opportunities and those engaging experiences. I did hear recently that all managers essentially are event planners at this point.
I like that idea.
All managers are event planners. Every meeting that you're holding, you're hosting an event. Yeah.
It's an experience. That's the way I look at it. Yeah. It's experience design, right? And then you kind of like look, there's a facilitation piece that I think is a responsibility on like managers these days, right? Like any team leads of any kind need to understand how to enable people. And there's that coaching role as opposed to, the 1950s sort of idea of like cracking the whip and kicking butts, right? Yeah. Taking names and kicking butts or something. But like, and I like that. I like the idea of kind of, you know, organizations as they grow, having people, rather than managing hierarchy, instead taking ownership of the encouragement of groups of people.
Yeah.
And, you know, whether that's, again, a manager within a business unit or HR structured in such a way that it's maybe got this domain expertise of different types of operational prowess in the organization. So not being an office in the back with Judy in the filing cabinet, but instead being like 20 people that are embedded in working teams even, and that they come together and collaborate and share information. There's probably a lot of interesting work being done in looking at models for HR scaffolding in different types of organizations. But yeah, a big part of that is this. I think it's a big part of it is this like idea that working with people is becoming a more amorphous thing because people themselves are experiencing a lot, perhaps more, with many screens in their faces compared to decades before us, right?
The amount of information that we all have now is incredible. You have the Library of Alexandria in your pocket, right? This is old school things to be talking about, but it's still just as pertinent today as ever. So yeah, when you are trying to get people to have healthy boundaries around digital tools, it is about encouraging healthy habits more so, and like pointing towards that and creating opportunities for it, facilitating it, than trying to tell people like, don't do this. You know, people don't respond well to that in general.
To hand slapping.
Yeah, exactly.
Nor we see the same line being drawn with physical well-being, right? And pre-pandemic, it was, there are wellness programs that are larger organizations because we want to provide our employee base with tools to promote things because of all the beneficial side effects of that. There's they have a reason to do it. It's not just for the good of the people, but if everybody's feeling a little bit better, you're going to have a more productive workforce. The same applies for digital.
Free range employees, man.
Well, and this is a happy coincidence. It really, really is, that people who feel supported and engaged and all of these wonderful things in a workplace are just the better teams that are doing the better work. Capitalism always was a way of warping these things, but I always just like to say it's a happy coincidence, and I'm not going to look the gift horse in the mouth. Man,
it's so interesting. And I know this is a kind of another big thing that maybe is a rabbit hole, but like you pair that, right? All this great stuff. Yeah, we got to like make the people happy, give them all these great tools, stay out of their face, but support them. Definitely check. And then you look at some massive technology companies that not just because of the pandemic and overhiring are doing a correction curve, but also now openly announcing, like there were a couple in the last couple of weeks. Google was one just a couple days ago, saying, okay, we're going to start letting teams go. Some of y'all might be our best people, but I'm sorry, you're going to go. And the way that, like, you know, wait, was it that or Microsoft? Google, I think. No, it might have been Microsoft. I don't know who it was. One of these big tech companies. And of course, part of it was justification of, you know, triaging in the organization in any way being replaced by AI and productivity tools being implemented to make the organization more productive than the people that represent the organization in a way. But I guess what I'm getting at is there's this new era of no matter how good you are at what you do and how effective the team is, there's always going to be looming questions about whether the company itself is aligned with its best opportunity because of requiring people.
Well, and like this is kind of a change in the human resources landscape, in that like there's three factors of production, right? You have land, labor, and capital. Right. You need these three things. This is what makes it all go round, according to I don't know, any kind of way of looking at these kinds
Uncle
of
Jim.
Yeah, exactly. So what we're having now is a situation where suddenly capital is becoming labor.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting. So when human resources now, which has been sort of the stewards of labor to this point within inside of an organization, that component of that three-legged stool that keeps it all standing up. Well, now capital is starting to do the labor that otherwise would require human beings, right? So even, is it human resources anymore? Is it starting to become just like intelligence resources, or is it labor resources, to try and broadly more bring in these kinds of AI tools to the conversation, because they are very swiftly going to become members of the organization, especially with a lot of things that we've been hearing from an AI standpoint of using things like edge AI. These kind of terms are starting to get thrown around, which is where you have like an LLM running locally so that it keeps all of your data secured, and even locally on your phone or locally on a local server. It takes a great deal of computational power to train these models, but not a lot to run them comparatively. So you can do this locally. So in this way, the confidentiality problems that come along with AI are falling away. We have
This is for the application of a knowledge basing. Like at the beginning, like input all the data into this thing, so that the organization has a knowledge base that can be referenced and acted on.
I mean, there's companies working on this right now. I think that's going to be one of the biggest changes from an HR standpoint, or the way that we'll look at employee data. Now you can have an LLM that's looking at all of that information, and then, as you were saying earlier, what's a file folder? You won't need to know what a file folder is. You'll be able to talk to a language model that's able to just pull it right up for you immediately, right? There's a new company called Rabbit that's releasing the R1. And this is where I encountered the first term, large action model. So as opposed to an LLM, it's an LAM that is able to, as they would say, learn any app interface, and then you can give it a command and it will like book you your Uber kind of idea. Then it'll say, please confirm the thing that I've booked. And then you go confirm. So when it comes to human beings being displaced inside of workplaces and these large layoffs occurring, you won't be replaced by AI. Humans won't be replaced inside of the workplace by AI. They will be replaced by someone using it. The individual that is able to essentially be like the human intelligent hub with an AI wrapper is going to be the one who's able to accomplish so much more and so much less. And that's the change that's coming dramatically. It's like being able to interface with these tools will become the new Excel on a resume, I think.
What level of X is this individual, and being able to test that against, here's a task. How fast did you get it done? How creatively did you get it done? What is your AI stack as an individual becomes the measuring stick.
And even then, it's interesting you bring up that example, because in the Microsoft suite and the way that they've rolled out Copilot, right? And the idea that Copilot's, supposedly going to be baked into all the productivity tools that they already sell and that people use. It's a great, I think the kind of semantics are cool, but also conceptually it's interesting to think of the AI being baked into what you already do and how you do it to level you up. So everyone's got a little buddy, a little digital buddy, and Clippy is smarter now, right? That was the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And so like Clippy's helping you, and you can rely on Clippy.
Clippy's not back.
Clippy's Copilot.
Okay.
V2, man.
All right.
Judgment Day.
It's gonna be like Scooby-Doo, just pull off the mask of Copilot and be like, haha, it was you the whole time, Clippy. Yeah.
What a time.
I like that though. I like that idea that like the technology can support people's workflows and enable them to like lever up and do more things. And
it's the speed. I don't think we're necessarily becoming more effective through the implementation of AI, but much more efficient. So it's the sheer speed that someone can do things at now, and mock up this, that, the other. Like, you don't have to make that PowerPoint presentation anymore. You just don't. You can guide an AI through the process of making it for you. So the ability to do these things is very quickly falling to the backdrop as a valuable skill set. When you can have someone else do it better, it's good to know this kind of stuff. Like, say, for example, I was playing around with GPTs and I tried to make one that had every single Employment Standards Act, essentially for every single province. I just downloaded every single one, uploaded it into a GPT, and then utilized it to do cross comparisons across different like jurisdictions and so on and so forth, just for fun. It was a fun way of building this little bot to help me out with employment law. Because I know employment law, I'm able to spot when the bot's going awry.
Yeah.
Right, and it will, right?
It will sometimes.
Start lying
of
to
course.
you a little bit?
It can't not,
Hallucinating
because
like crazy.
Yeah.
Making logical leaps.
so
You can run in the office. That's okay.
yeah. So it's like, if suddenly, and this is one of the things I am worried about, if suddenly we do start undervaluing these core skill sets, the things that AI is able to do inside of the workplace, we're going to very quickly have individuals who are utilizing these tools without any ability to have like a sense of smell as to whether or not they're off. And then that will start grinding that efficiency back down again, because there isn't that expertise to be able to
Fact check.
well, they have a gut check about like, wait a minute, you're being weird, you know, and like know when to ask the system to like look back on its own work and like proof it. But this is as bad as they'll ever be, and they're only getting better.
Man, I just have this image. It's really funny. I have this image of all these like Wendy's, you know, at the beach, chilling with their GPTs running, communicating with their boss. Like, there must be people that have figured out automating their job enough that like no one knows, you know.
I one time saw this really funny comedy sketch, and it wasn't AI, but it was like outsourcing. It's like this one guy's like an accountant. He's like, oh yeah, I've just like, you know, outsourced my work to this like one guy, Steve, over here. And he just like, you know, does all of my work. Sometimes I check it, but most of the time I just hand it in. And eventually you realize that like every single, he's like, yeah, and like for the cost of like a few cups of coffee a day, like I've got that. It's great. Then you realize that everyone in the organization has done the same thing, until eventually where it's like a bunch of like computers just sitting around a conference table with every single executive having outsourced their work to somebody else, and they're all arguing on behalf of the executive team.
That's a painful lesson.
Yeah, it's really funny, but it's also a little bit true to your point. Like, it's like, how much, if you now have AI and you have like human outsourcing, how much could you just spoof doing your job?
Mm-hmm. Well, especially because I mean, if we look at it, how much work is make work. And if you look at corporate Canada and you look at these like big, slow, bulky institutional enterprises, there's a lot. There's a huge, and the government, like what does the government even do, man?
The government's supposed to be the monopoly to stop the monopolies, but unfortunately, look at the Rogers Shaw.
There's too many people. That's a whole nother thing. The crisis that's looming for the government of all levels in Canada. What is it? 450,000 people or more are employed collectively by our government across the country. That's a lot of people. And they also have a lot of lock-in, and they can never be fired.
Yeah.
And so there's this whole thing of like, well, they're totally redundant, but like they can't be fired, you know?
But also, you have to go to the CRA. That's the idea of the monopoly. You can't file your taxes anywhere else.
Yeah.
So because they have a monopoly, there's no reason for them to ever change.
Yeah.
Or get more efficient. There's no competition.
And that's the thing. It's a sad thing because
privatize taxes.
Yeah, we shouldn't do this. There's a lot of things that we shouldn't privatize. I will accept inefficiency of a government body over privatization.
But I'm just thinking of 450,000. Maybe that includes 150,000 people.
Yep.
That don't do that much every day, you know, or they do make work stuff. There's like paper shuffling. How cool would it be if those people could actually find, you know, joy in their life by like doing
meaningful
creative
work.
things?
Yeah. But we have this like Puritan kind of thought process that if you want to eat, you got to work. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And all of these different sayings that reinforce these ideas of that it is a moral ill to not be working. And so long as we're attached to that, we'll continue the way that we are. And we'll continue to make a lot of bullshit work. Like, into what I was talking about earlier, and, you know, executives having egos and so on and so forth. It's like, well, everyone wants to have a larger team reporting to them. That makes them more important. So everyone inside of that system is incentivized to allow bullshit work to continue, be it the executive who knows that they're not really doing a whole lot, but they make them look good. And they know they're not doing a whole lot, but they're not going to tell anyone up top that they're not doing a whole lot. But then it's just a lot of emotional labor and trying to look busy on a regular basis. And that's draining as heck for people, and it's not meaningful, and it's literally trading time for money at that point, which not a good way to run a society. As you say, it doesn't make people happy, and we're like squandering a huge amount of human potential around this idea that you must work to eat, like you must work to live. Basic necessities, if you're not working, good luck. So people don't have that safety net. They don't have the ability to feel like they can be entrepreneurial. Like we don't have a universal basic income or something of that sort, which, by the way, would eliminate a lot of government jobs. You don't have all those complicated social services with just one UBI payment. So yeah, there's a huge amount of opportunity there and a huge amount of human potential that could be unlocked if we weren't so stuck in this mentality, I would say.
Stuck on the wheel that's spinning, too scary to jump off.
Well, I mean, weren't they always saying that like our drudgery was to be alleviated with increased automation and increast automation and increased automation?
Yeah.
The 1970s are like, man, like we're going to be barely working in the future. The 80s are going to be great.
Humans have always said that, right?
Yeah, but now we're working more than ever. And with digital technologies now, we just don't have the ability to disconnect like we used to. Like,
and we do. It's just everyone's addicted. So addicted. People get so mad at me. They get so mad at me all the time. I sent you a message. How did you send it to me? What channel did it come by? Does that matter? You should have got my message. And I'm like, well, I haven't checked that app, or I've been busy. What do you mean you've been busy? I've been in meetings. So you could have seen the notification. I'm like, no, I'm actually talking to humans in front of me. My phone, I don't even know where my phone is right now, and that feels great, you know?
Yeah, it is.
But how many people are like that? How many people?
You're not alone.
You're not alone.
No,
I'm not alone.
And
I'm with a couple
it's growing.
people, in fact.
It's
right
growing.
Well, I mean, the dumb phone is coming in a lot of ways. Like the sales of that are going up. Yeah.
Oh, the punked phone. I have the punked phone.
Yeah.
No way.
I
got
it for my mother-in-law when she fell. She fell ill, and she unfortunately passed on. But before that, she didn't have a phone, and we needed a way of contacting her. And I was looking for what's the simplest phone you can buy. And in Monocle magazine, which is my Bible, I saw punked. They were advertising. This is, I don't know how many years ago now. 8 years ago, they were advertising and being advocated for. And so I have it in its original box in my drawer. But yeah, what's funny though is that when I did the competitive analysis, I couldn't buy a shit old cell phone.
No.
And there are not many of those simple Nokia N90, not even N95, whatever the first gen, E61. There's not many of those kicking around. Or the Motorola to go way back.
Oh man, the Razor.
Razor.
Even Razor is not even early.
Gen 2.
Yeah.
Gen 2, 3, 4.
But anyway, the idea that there is this kind of return to every youth culture movement in every generation is trying to get back a generation or two generations. Right. It used to be better. Oh, vinyl. Oh, now it's I'm gonna wear a retro 1992 Varney sweatshirt. It's dude, man, really?
Yeah.
Something. Mom jeans, man.
Mullets.
Wow.
Mullets, fanny packs.
They're coming back.
Okay, why can't we bring back the cloak? I'm just saying, fashion keeps coming around. I'm really waiting
cloaks are cool.
for a proper cloak to come back around again, and just run around with the hood and it's protecting you from the rain. It sounds fantastic.
Just bite people. Just bite them. Yeah, so I think it's cool that we're seeing this cultural recycling, because what I think will happen with technology is it's going to bring back simpler technology, and this is something that not many people are talking about, but I think it's very interesting, and especially if you look at tech stacks for operating companies, looking at tools that work despite their newness. I think is going to be a big thing. We're going to see it with software. I think this is the frontier that people don't realize, because hardware is the easy thing to date. You look at a piece of hardware and you say, especially if it's hardware, it's programmed to do that thing in that locked in way. But even with software, I talk about this a lot with digital artists, and how when I was making music in the 90s, our tool set was you'd have a wave editor, and you'd have a kind of a sequencer and maybe a sampler to record into the wave editor, at least a software tool set for making music. And I had all of that software on this one particular laptop, and that laptop was awesome for making music. I had that computer to make music, not to do 500 things. And as soon as I upgraded my my skill set, and I was doing Ableton Live and all this stuff, the responsibilities of that new software's creative potential stopped me from feeling excited because I didn't own the tool anymore. The tool was too demanding of me. And this is something that I think is happening with business productivity tools, and especially the open terroir of AI, where people may feel a little bit, overburdened, even though they do have Clippy there helping them.
We've seen this already, though, to know that we're safe, in the sense that you can buy plates and cups and forks anywhere, but you still have pottery shops. You still have bespoke, custom, handmade things. And to your point, right, there's, yes, the efficiency of having all this, Alexandria in your pocket. I'm optimistic because there's still this small subsection of people, or smaller, of like, I want to listen to records. Cool.
Right.
Go do that. There's Spotify and there's still vinyl. That's awesome. There's people that are like into CDs. That's interesting. I'm learning about that now. They're making their heyday, right? And there's always going to be, to your point, that of something to go back to the source of the thing.
And antique markets exist for a reason.
Yeah.
And they're huge. People are antiquing like crazy. Big business.
And the inventory is growing larger because you want a cloak.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's not from this deck. We have to go back
century.
We have to go back centuries, right?
I'm just saying, when will it come back around?
I think it's a good idea. But I'm so like the inventory of like an antique store is growing. There's I want like what was in the 90s or the 80s or the 70s. Like we've got all these things.
There is one issue. And the issue is, and this is like, say, for example, when they're trying to do video game preservation or something like that as an art farm. It's like that game, unless it's played on the exact same console and on the exact same television screen, despite you having the software, is not the same game. Preserving the game isn't the software. It's the total experience of it. And then silicon has an expiry date, and chips just wear down and they stop working. So you can go to an antique market and find yourself a gas lamp that works fantastic. Go to the market and try to find the lamp that was run by a old chip and it won't turn on.
Yeah.
Because that has just degraded. It's just the nature of the beast.
This is why COBOL is still a thing for banks, and why if you're a COBOL developer, you didn't get it. Knowing the old language is beneficial to the individual.
Yeah. So I don't know where we're going.
They know the old ways.
The old ways.
Just developers with cloaks.
Yes. But I just think that unfortunately the antique market isn't growing in that way.
No.
As the modern era of products has an expiry date baked into it in the form of any kind of digital technology. I like talking futurist topics and just like what's happening with modern work. We didn't even get into the topic about, I think, hybrid being the worst of both worlds.
Let's do that as, I know I always say this in every episode, but let's do that, save that as a panel discussion or a round table in front of a live audience.
That would be a good topic, actually.
Right? Hybrid. Let's do that.
It's a good topic, only because it impacts almost everybody at this point, because everywhere is going hybrid, and I don't think it's being done well.
In some facet, every organization is working hybrid.
Yeah.
Right? They've been forced into it or they've chosen it, but it hasn't been designed for most people. And trust me, I've been selling it since when I founded this company, you know, and it's very, very interesting. We're seeing a lot more uptake in, physical space being used for temporary usage.
Yeah.
And when that's purposeful, it works really well because the purpose typically we're seeing with successful teams tends towards socialization and keeping people, giving them happy space. So when they come together to like hang, then they love it and they go back to their computers at home with a lot of energy, you know?
Exactly.
So that's a good way of doing it.
100%.
But there's so many bad ways.
But just when people showing up to the office to sit on Zoom calls.
Oh yeah, it's pretty weird, right?
That's the worst.
Pretty
dystopian,
but
man.
that's like so much of what's happening.
Nobody's figured it out well.
They haven't figured it out well, but we can talk more on that later.
Awesome. Thanks for coming by. It was a wicked chat. And yes.
Cool.
Thank you.
Awesome. Let's do a little, I don't know,
I got to run.
hands on the table.
Hands on the table.
Go team. Boom. All right. That's an episode.
I'm running.